Thank you all for attending and showing your interest in our center's report. So I am assistant professor in the School of Anthropology, and I also direct the Center for Regional Food Studies, which is housed within the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. And this year I had the fortune of receiving one of the Udall Center's public policy fellowships, which afforded me time away from teaching in the fall semester to implement a new approach to doing the research for the purposes of this report that you'll be hearing about today. And I have a slideshow that I'll share. I'll share my screen. I don't expect that it will take probably more than 20-25 minutes to walk you through the presentation. At any point you have questions, I am very open to answering as I go. You don't have to hold off until the end to ask your question. If you want to write it in the chat, I'll be looking there periodically. And so we'll have time for discussion at the end. Okay, so I'll go ahead with sharing my screen. Oh, and actually I'll add that my research more broadly, I work on migration, the intersections of migration and health with food and economic systems. So my work as an anthropologist, I do medical and sociocultural anthropology. I work with migrant populations both in the US and also in Italy, and most recently Sicily. And the work that I'll be sharing with you today constitutes one facet of my research interests. Much of what I do does have an applied emphasis to it. And I hope that comes across with this particular research. So let me get to shared screen. I don't know about for the rest of you, but it still feels surreal to be, I teach, I have classes right now and we're using Zoom, and just this synchronous meeting. It's hard to believe that there are others of you on the other side of my screen. So I really do feel like I'm talking to myself. I don't know if any of you have had that experience. Okay. Here we go. Can you all see?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mary Beth. All right. So here's a quick overview of what I'll be covering. So first of all, what is the state of the Tucson Food System Report? Why did we feel that it needed to be reconceptualized? How we conducted this year's report that was recently published, and I'll highlight some of the findings from this year's report, and I'll end on talking about next steps and some of the challenges and anticipated challenges posed by COVID-19. So here's our center's mission, and I'll read it. I can't see my full screen. Whoa, jumping around here. Sorry. For some reason, okay, I can't see everything on my screen. All right, to integrate social, behavioral, and life sciences into interdisciplinary studies and community dialogue regarding change in regional food systems. We involve students and faculty in the design, implementation, and evaluation of pilot interventions and participatory community-based research in the Arizona-Sonora Borderlands food shed surrounding Tucson, a UNESCO-designated city of gastronomy, in a manner that can be replicated, scaled up, and applied to other regions globally. This is a link to reports from the past few years. So if you visit our center's website, crfs.arizona.edu, and navigate to under research and publications, you will find links to PDFs of past reports. And for this year, in addition to the PDF written report, we also created accompanying PowerPoints that are narrated, and these can be downloaded. And I'll get to why we did that toward the end of my presentation, but we produced versions in both English and Spanish. So those are publicly available, and I invite you to read the report in its entirety. It's relatively short. But we also have links here to the report from 2018-2019. So you can download that. That was actually the first year that I was personally involved in the production of the report. In preceding years, the report was overseen by the center's founder, Gary Paul Napan. And if you go back, if you look through these archives, you'll see that the report has a unique character year after year. And so part of my interest when I was appointed director of the center in the report was really trying to develop a template, something that we could be replicating year after year. And actually, I think given the circumstances we're facing right now, this may no longer be an annual report, just because it requires a lot of resources and time, and it's not entirely self-evident why we need an annual report instead of, say, something that comes out every couple of years or every 5 years. But essentially, we're trying to document change in our regional food system with this particular report. Go back to my PowerPoint. So the report, what's its purpose? The State of the Tucson Food System Report seeks to support the efforts of diverse social actors and institutions working across various sectors of the Sonora-Arizona Borderlands food system. So in some ways, the title of the report in itself is a misnomer. This is a title that I inherited, but really we're thinking in terms of our Borderlands food system or food shed, not just Tucson. I'll also note that this year, the 2019-2020 report has a focus on Southern Arizona and really rural Southern Arizona and not Tucson. The past few years, the report has had most of its focus has been on Tucson. So we collect and synthesize the most recent data available to underscore successes, problems, and barriers in our food system. And ideally, this report can be referenced for informing policy at various scales within both informal and formal policy settings. I lifted this from my proposal to the Udall Center from last April, so a year ago, because this was really the impetus for reconceptualizing the report. So I'll read that excerpt here. It has been made increasingly clear to those of us involved with the production of the report that we need to overhaul its process to realize its potential for transforming policy and to promote community development. The production of the report presents an opportunity to collaborate with diverse populations in cultivating a network across our food shed. So what was entailed in reimagining or reconceptualizing this report? One, we really wanted to include the diverse voices of various constituencies in Southern Arizona, not only in the data or findings, but really in the process of collecting those data and analyzing them and disseminating them. As with the previous year's report, we utilized the values-based whole measures, which I'll show you those measures momentarily, but this is an existing toolkit that was developed with support from the USDA several years ago, and has been replicated, has been utilized in many communities in North America. But we wanted to utilize the whole measures in, oh, I don't know why this slide moved ahead without me clicking on it. My apologies. To decentralize and make this research process more participatory. And part of the rationale here is that we felt that we really need a regional network of community-based collaborators. And this year we started with outreach in the communities of Nogales, Cochise, and Ajo, but a network that is grassroots, is perhaps organizing for policy changes at various scales, but is really the life of the report itself. And in that, we're emphasizing the process over the product. I'd say that historically, the report has been more about the product, the written report. And I've been told that by various organizations in Tucson in particular, that it has been helpful for them. But I think it's hard to measure its impact without a network of committed individuals who are working together to mobilize for political changes. And we have felt rather limited as a center to be able to do that policy work in an effective way. Here are the whole measures for community food systems. And there's 6 different fields. They include vibrant farms, healthy people, justice and fairness, thriving local economies, sustainable ecosystems, and strong communities. And each of the fields has a set of value-based practices associated with it. If you visit the toolkit in its entirety online, you will find that there are guides for evaluating these fields across communities. So our methodology for this year, beginning in April of last year, we conducted a few trips to do outreach with organizations in Ajo, Nogales, and Cochise. And we identified schools and clinics as the places to start. And we met with staff from various clinics and schools and left behind flyers. We were recruiting individuals who could work with us as community-based collaborators. Within a couple of months, we had recruited 2 individuals from each community within Ajo, Nogales, and Cochise. And with them, we convened through Zoom a total of 3 times. So we met in the early fall to go over the objectives of the project, to indoctrinate them to some of the basic fundamentals of doing research. And we utilized a community partners training in orienting them to research ethics and research with human subjects. So actually for this research, we applied for and received human subjects approval. Then we actually developed a community dialogue guide with all of the community-based collaborators. And the final guide was comprised of 10 questions, and the guide, we translated it into Spanish as our community-based collaborators in Nogales in particular anticipated that the dialogues would be happening in Spanish. So in the end, we had each community hosted 2 community dialogues. Our community-based collaborators organized, got the word out about these dialogues happening, recruited participants, provided refreshments to participants. Each dialogue was about 1.5 to 2 hours. So across the 3 communities, there were 56 participants. They ranged in age from 22 to 79 and included teachers, farmers, students, healthcare professionals, parents of school-age children, retirees, and city workers. And so here is, I'm sorry to bombard you with text, but this is the community dialogue guide. So all of the community-based collaborators, as part of one of our Zoom convenings, trainings, participated in this guide. So we went through a couple of rounds as a group of testing kind of different questions among us, and ultimately refined the guide to be as you see it right now. So each of the facilitators in the communities at their community dialogues started with just introducing themselves and introducing the concept of a food system. And then they proceeded through this list of statements, asking participants to express the degree to which they agree or disagree with these statements. So for example, to what extent do you agree or disagree that our food system ensures access for all community members to fresh, healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food? Or our food system helps to connect our community members culturally. So after each of these statements, facilitators invited participants to share their thoughts. And then they ended with these open-ended questions. So what environmental concerns do you have, if any, about pesticides, GMOs, pollution, climate change? And what are the most pressing health problems in your community? So I am actually going to, some of these slides are from the presentations that are publicly available. And my research assistant recorded, developed an audio recording for the results. So I'm going to share that with you right now, and I have to turn on my volume. So hopefully we don't have any technical difficulties here with that.
Now let's talk about our preliminary results. Vibrant farms. Local agriculture was described as commercialized, providing only low-wage seasonal employment in all of the communities. Government agricultural subsidies and the belief that local farmers are funded to refrain from planting certain crops were also common concerns. In Cochise, residents discussed the surrounding export-oriented big agriculture that is characterized by poor regulation as a critical barrier to vibrant farms. However, Ajo residents cited some local organizations that promote and support local farms, such as the Ajo Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Healthy people. Access to affordable, fresh, and nutritious food was discussed as a pressing issue in all of the communities. Organic food is difficult to find, and irregular shipments of fresh produce leads to substandard quality food and an overabundance of frozen produce. In Cochise, physical isolation from well-stocked supermarkets act as a barrier to access. Cochise school-aged children may have the best access to diverse and nutritious food. However, it is not always eaten and sometimes goes to waste. Older residents in Cochise have the worst access to diverse and affordable nutrition due to transportation barriers. In Nogales and Ajo, farmers markets and the ability to use double-up bucks in food aid is popular. However, there is a significant reliance on food banks as well. Ajo residents worried about the health of youth, citing a lack of behavioral health support and limited access to recreational facilities. Nogales residents cited diabetes, obesity, and heart disease as top health concerns overall, and dementia in older populations. Justice and fairness. Concern for the health and safety of local agricultural and industry workers was voiced in all of the communities, citing unregulated work environments characterized by limited access to proper protective gear, long and strenuous work hours, and sometimes severe weather, poor job security, low wages, and no employment-related benefits. Community members in Nogales also voiced concerns of poorly enforced age restrictions being compounded by potential OSHA violations. Thriving local economies. Locally owned businesses were discussed as integral to the local economies of each community. However, businesses operated by large corporations were also unanimously cited as a constant threat to local economies. In Nogales, where produce is the main industry, community members reported access to sparse, low-wage, and seasonal work, and noted that industry proprietors do not reside locally and rarely reinvest resources back into the community. Nogales residents also cited relying on Mexico's economy for affordable goods. While Ajo is the most geographically isolated of the three communities, some residents also viewed this as a strength, promoting economic autonomy and resilience. Sustainable ecosystems. Pollution, commercialized pesticide use, and declining pollinator populations were all common concerns. Improved recycling programs was also a popular theme discussed in each community. Ajo residents expressed worry about the impending effects of climate change. In Nogales, residents alluded to pollution and contamination they perceived to be coming from Mexico, while overfilled dumps and the mismanagement of landfills were mentioned to be affecting the U.S. side. Strong communities. While all of the communities voiced concerns about the loss of tradition and cultural food knowledge, there are local businesses and nonprofits who are helping to preserve regional food knowledge. Ajo community members in particular discussed the importance of diverse local food practices, like home-based culinary endeavors, and the strength that is derived from the sociality and cultural exchange that is connected to food events like farmers markets and festivals. Conclude.
All right. Those results can also be revisited if you download the PDF of our report on our website. But just some initial takeaways and our thinking forward with this report and lessons learned from this year's process. We do, as a center, we want to provide technical assistance to supporting this burgeoning regional network. And all of the community-based collaborators have expressed interest in continuing to work with us and also helping to recruit others to be part of a participatory process in doing this research and some form of political action associated with it. Our original plan had been to, the next phase of this work was that all of the collaborators were going to convene with existing groups in their communities to present the results of the report from this year. And we were going to, myself and my research assistant, were going to attend those meetings. They were going to present the PowerPoint and hear reactions from community members. And this was going to help inform the next phase of the work. So right now, for obvious reasons, physical distancing, we're not doing that at present. All of the community-based collaborators do have the report, and they are all listed as co-authors on the report. They also have the PowerPoints, and we hope that they are beginning to share those resources with other groups and organizations in their communities. But this report, we just published it a couple of weeks ago. I have yet to receive any correspondence from folks in those communities about if they've had a chance to review it or not. We'll get there. So this, we had hoped to continue on the next phase of the research and produce a biennial report. So this report that's available right now is shorter. We had hoped to expand on it for the purposes of a biennial report to come out around this time next year. That is paused for now, and we are evaluating what next steps should be taken, and I would welcome your feedback and input as well. As we look to repeat this process, though, going forward, we do really want leadership coming from the communities. And like I said, we see ourselves as providing technical assistance to enacting whatever actions this newly formed network wishes to take. And we imagine these communities, this also is in part a finding of the process from this year, but these communities are already beginning to share resources and best practices just through having convened during this work. There's not a lot of coordination, at least from their perspective, among rural communities in Southern Arizona. So we do think there's a lot of transformative potential there. Yes, we will just continue to share institutional resources to create change, positive change in our regional food system at various scales. I say that not knowing what our own center's budget scenario will be for this coming year. That leads me to acknowledgements. This work would not have been possible without the fellowship that the Udall Center generously provided this year, as well as the funding that we receive as a center from the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. And the college had allocated extra resources to us doing the report this way this year, and that allowed us to provide stipends to our community-based collaborators and also to cover expenses like refreshments at meetings or to cover the cost to utilize meeting spaces in their communities. It also covers the cost of printing the report. Of course, we want to thank all of the community-based collaborators who are named as co-authors on the report. I want to acknowledge especially the chair of my school, Diane Austin, without whose ideas and input, I would not have thought about doing the work in this way. And she really provided very practical advice for how to sort of manage this group of collaborators and the process as a whole. Maribel Alvarez as well. Keegan Krause was the graduate assistant, and it's through the Coverdell Fellows program that he has been able to work with the center these past 2 years. I really hope that we're able to continue a partnership with the Coverdell Fellows program. Juanita Trejo provided Spanish translation of the report, and again, it was because of resources provided by the college that we were able to hire someone to do that work. And then SBS Tech, especially Anna Deo and Mackenzie Meitner for formatting and design of the physical report. So I will stop sharing my screen here now. And yeah, happy to take questions, just cater an open discussion. Thank you.
I suppose we could
The silent applause.
Silent applause with everyone applauding on mute. Well, thank you very much, Megan. That was great. We can then.
Bob, you're on mute.
Woo! I thought I was muted.
Oh, okay.
No,
Yeah.
I'm not.
You're not. Never mind.
I was not. Okay. Yeah. So if anyone has questions, we can go around.
Hey, Megan, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about the direction that you all seem to be going in with the food systems report. I think the collaborative research is excellent. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about your recruitment methods for, for finding your facilitators, and then also how you all kind of came up with like your the questions you wanted, or the topics you wanted to focus on in the meeting.
Yeah. So we created flyers and visited, sort of pre-selected and identified schools and clinics in these 3 communities, and went there in person, introduced ourselves, and talked about the center to staff at these schools and clinics in Ajo, Cochise, and Nogales. Left behind flyers, and they posted those flyers. Some of the individuals we met with, we left something like 50 flyers, I think, at each location. If they were health providers, I'm thinking in particular in Ajo, one individual is a nutrition education specialist at a clinic, and she actually ended up being one of our collaborators, working with us as a community-based collaborator. But she had also shared like the flyer with some of the individuals that she sees at the clinic. We left these flyers behind in good faith that the word would get out. And we did receive a good deal of interest, but fortunately we weren't inundated with requests to be part of the project. We actually had just the right number, more or less, from each community. We had more people interested than we could actually hire, but we didn't actually have to sort of vet people because they vetted themselves. They felt like they were not outgoing enough or comfortable enough convening community dialogues, and so they decided that this wasn't going to be for them. And then the design of the guide. So as I was saying, this group, we convened by Zoom. We had 3 trainings. So it was required that all of the collaborators attend and participate in the 3 convenings. One was in early October, one was in early November, and one was in early December. And so we were meeting at different phases of the project. The first call, we introduced sort of a sample guide, and we did a mock dialogue among all of us. So that was then, actually in some ways a source of data, because all of these individuals were talking about these issues from their communities. But it was also through the process of walking through a mock guide that they were able to refine the language and also identify things that were not there and provide suggestions about what we should be asking. And then there was a Google Doc that was circulated after that particular call, on which all of the collaborators provided their input, added questions, deleted questions. So it was a very collective endeavor in putting together the guide. And then I had translated most of it into Spanish and solicited input on the Spanish version with the collaborators in Nogales, who were the ones facilitating discussions there. So hopefully that addressed.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, hi, Megan, thanks. That was a really interesting talk, and I get a better sense for both the methods that you've used for the state of the food report for Tucson, but also the background that's come out of. I played a part probably back now, maybe 6 or 8 years ago with Gary Nabhan and Sally Marston, Melanie Hengel, several of us involved, that was trying to come out with some ideas about, the regional food approach. And one of the questions I think I'm still struggling with, I remember it was reflected then, was how broadly do we conceive of a food shed? So I know you're looking at consumption and production in kind of Arizona and Sonora and focused on the border. But of course, and if this is still the case, I think Nogales is the second largest port of entry for fresh produce from Mexico going to the US and far beyond as well.
Yeah.
And related to that, I wonder if you have had any thoughts or work or know of scholars who are practitioners who are working on some of that cross-border food trade at Nogales, but particularly in relation to USMCA and what the implications and impacts are of sort of trade agreements on food and food crossings, but then also, and then we've got some other questions of resources involved, and so forth. But USMCA and border food trade is kind of the focus I'd like to draw attention to.
I really don't have beyond what's been reported in by U of A faculty on cross-border food trade and the port of Nogales, yes, serving as the second largest port for produce entering the United States. I really don't have much knowledge on that topic, and I don't know who's currently working on it. But I think Laurel, who's on the call, might have more insight into that. So, but I'll just say that we, in thinking into like the future and how we want to expand on the work that we've done, this network that I've alluded to a couple of times, we do want it to be a trans-border network. And given we have the resources and the staff, research support staff to do this, we would like to have be talking more about this regional food shed that does transcend the geopolitical border. This is all, this is still just very new. Us doing the report this way, and I'm still new. I still consider myself a recent transplant to the Southwest. I've only been here the last couple of years. So if others know of people we should be talking to and inviting to the table and making part of this process, and different issues we should be examining and accounting for in this report, I'm all ears. So,
I'll just observe that one of the other Udall Center Fellows this year, George Frisvold, isn't on this topic for his Udall Center Fellowship, but has done some interesting work on that, including with the tomato suspension agreement, and looking not only at some of the drivers of trade, but then some of those binational agreements, and in that case, the strong Florida impact on policy setting that would then restrict Mexican tomatoes coming in because they were perceived or politically argued to be, competing with Florida tomatoes. So then there's a whole kind of teleconnection of your food shed, if you will. So what happens in Florida influences the food shed here, and so forth. So there's some interesting, kind of scale questions here.
Yeah, and I don't know, to be honest, I don't really know what capacity we have to be overseeing, I guess, a research process to look at some of those dynamics. I view our role as more of one where we're helping to facilitate transformations to policy based on people's lived experiences of their food system. So we're really doing the social science work of it. As you see, all of our results speak to people's perceptions, right? That their lived experiences. And so how can we take something like this as a living document and utilize it for the purposes of improving people's lived experiences and working toward community development? That's the niche I feel like we have the resources to pursue right now. that's not to say it won't morph and change, and that will bring in, you know, more expertise and be able to do this work. But part of my interest, I think, in approaching the report this way this year and going forward is really to build capacity at the local level for people to understand the problems they're experiencing and be able to articulate those problems to policymakers and have a direct, a direct path to or way of expressing their, of bringing their lived experience to various scales of policy.
Yeah, let me add something, because I was also going to mention George Frisvold, and in a larger sense, George is also, one of his appointments is with Cooperative Extension. And so that raises the question of whether you folks have relations with Cooperative Extension as part of it. And then a second issue, which relates to what Chris said, is when you're defining the food shed, how do you view ranching, which is a major activity, a major food production activity, particularly in Cochise and on the reservation? How do you deal with that? Or do you? Is that not part of the mission of the center? I'm not really sure.
So I'll say that ranching didn't really come up in any of the community dialogues, but that's just a reflection of who was there, right? So going forward, you know, how would we, this was something that we talked about with our community-based collaborators, thinking through who should be at the table and how do we get them there. So I think we'd want to spend more time on that. Ideally, we'd spend more time on identifying key actors in these communities, including ranchers, to come and talk about what it is that they're experiencing, so that we capture that data. There was another part.
I want to talk to Tom Shivers.
Defining a food shed. I browse, there's the Food Shed Alliance. There's also that paper by Fagan from many years ago that's defining a food shed. So that is the definition that we're working with. But that's something that I'm constantly asking people in this region, people who work in the food system in this region, what do they perceive, like where do they draw a boundary of what is our food shed? And I think that there's many different interpretations. So I'd be curious to hear from others that are here right now what they feel like is included or not included in our food shed.
Well, I was wondering on that, food shed in a crisis changes the food shed, right? Because suddenly you have goods coming in from all over the country to supply food banks, for example, right? And we're seeing that now. And so I'm hoping that, the center has the funding to be able to produce a study this year to look at the effect of the crisis on the food shed.
Yeah, me too. Oh, and Dan McDonald from Cooperative Extension is part of our, he sits on the advisory board for our center.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Back to Bob's point about Cooperative Extension. Yeah. And also Matt Mars has expressed interest in kind of taking more of a leadership role in overseeing the report, and is thinking about sort of different ways that we can support more of this sort of capacity building and leadership development in these communities through things like Cooperative Extension.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments, feedback?
Have you gotten good feedback from policymakers?
I think I'm so grateful that all of you showed up. Honestly, I think that this right now is just not very important to most people. It's sort of fallen off the radar. Last year when we released the report, we had a launch event on campus that had like 30 or 40 people in attendance. And we had physical copies of the report to distribute, nearly 1,000 copies. We will still print the report this year, and I will physically deliver it once we are able to Ajo and Cochise and Nogales. But I just think it's not on people's radar right now. And I'm not in a hurry, I guess, to bring it to anyone's attention. I do feel like there's more pressing matters at the moment. But if any of you have suggestions of ways that we can cater conversations with people in positions of policy, that would be great to know.
Have you thought of policy briefs?
Nope, not really. I've never been one to write a policy brief. So, I feel like those are skills that we're lacking among the resources we have, the staff that we have.
Okay. I have my students write policy briefs, and I could send you a template.
Sure.
Can I jump in? Just a comment. This is Laurel. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think, well, first of all, Megan, I think it's just like an amazing effort that you all have done. People might be wondering why I wasn't involved. I was on maternity leave last semester, so some of this I'm still learning about the process as well from Megan. But I think one of the things that we could do with the report is actually really contribute it to the Pinnacle Prevention's Arizona Food Systems Network that has an ongoing effort of kind of collating all of this research throughout the Arizona food system, and they are working on, policy proposals and actions of that sort. So I see the value of this particular report as being part of like creating a research effort that reaches a part of the state that is like generally overlooked by a lot of those efforts that tend to concentrate in Tucson, Phoenix, and Flagstaff. So that's one idea I think that we can certainly explore, like further collaboration there.
That's great. I appreciate that suggestion. I think that, as I was saying, with the unanticipated unanticipated pandemic, we were really looking forward to this dissemination phase, where collaborators were hosting conversations in their communities or piggybacking on groups that meet around these issues to present findings from this project and to think about what actions, next steps to take. And so for me, that's how I was conceptualizing policy as a really more grassroots scale. And that's just reflective of the kind of work I've done as an anthropologist, and more community organizing. But yes, I think it would be great to also be kind of reaching up to those in positions of power. And so if there are other bodies similar to like Pinnacle Prevention where you think we should be communicating this work, that would be wonderful to know.
Just a thought, I'm sure you all are already thinking and talking about this, but it's pretty amazing that this report came out basically, or the data from this report comes out just before the pandemic and highlights a lot of challenges that the region is facing. So it kind of serves as this body of like pre-pandemic challenges, which I'm sure are just like, like everywhere. Like it's just, now we're seeing the exaggerated versions of that because we're seeing great, how are all these challenges highlighted during a period of crisis. And so it seems like future research, like staying with this project, it's important to include what's happening now and how this pandemic then, really played up like all these problems they were already confronting. And then how can we use that to, create better change in the food system in the long term?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Any party
Megan?
queries from anybody? Yeah.
Oh, I was just, oh, sorry, are we already at time? I was just gonna ask a quick question about if there's anything about this approach, kind of community-based collaborators, that you found frustrating or kind of limiting in terms of what your vision is for the report and what you might change going forward?
Thank you. That's a great question. And so as I said early on, this year, we're really emphasizing the process over the product. So I'm not sure if our results reveal much that we didn't already know to some extent. But it's because so much of our effort this year and resources really went to this pilot year of recruiting and training and working with, in a participatory fashion, this group of community-based collaborators. And as I said early on, they were all part of the research design. They were part of the data reporting. They took very extensive notes from these dialogues, typed them up and shared them with us. We sort of compiled and synthesized them, and then they were part of a process of looking across communities. And so they were engaged in our analysis. But there were sort of, yes, at various steps of the process, we were troubleshooting. There was, I'll say, with just doing human subjects research, like some collaborators didn't realize, weren't aware of certain restrictions, or even though we had covered it in our training, I think we could have been, we should have repeated perhaps some of the material we covered regarding doing research with human subjects, just like, ages of participants, or reading through the consent form, collecting signatures. So there were 2 rounds, as I said, of dialogues in each community. And there was, we had a Zoom meeting after the first round of dialogues to troubleshoot anything that was going awry and to quickly address it. And also for the collaborators to sort of trade ideas about how to be effective with these dialogues and how to get people there. And there's sort of the unofficial findings of this process that we didn't include in the report that had everything to do with how do you manage a group of people doing research across different geographic settings who haven't done research before. We were incredibly grateful for their time. Yeah, they were receiving a stipend, but it was very modest. So we, it was just sort of managing emotions at times too, and expectations and all of that.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question.
Well, it seems like we've come to where there aren't any questions left. So let's thank Megan again.
Thanks so much, everybody. And please do check out the report on our website and send me any comments or suggestions.
Great. Well, thank you for being willing to do this. This is a first for us. And
yeah,
next time we'll hope to provide some food.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Thanks,
care.
Megan.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.
Bye.